Indiana temporarily suspends gas sales tax. An Indianapolis City County Councilor's home was shot at overnight this week. A second ICE detainee dies at Miami Correctional Facility, and a freeze in Indiana's child care voucher program is making it harder for foster parents to take in young children. From the television studios at WFYI Public Media, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending April 10th, 2026.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Ritchie.
The average price of a gallon of gas in Indiana is $4.13, but Hoosiers will start seeing cheaper prices at the pump in the next few days. Caroline Beck reports on a new emergency declaration from Governor Mike Braun.
Braun announced a 30-day pause on the state's 7% gas sales tax on Wednesday as gas prices continue to rise due to the war with Iran. Braun says after 30 days, his office will reevaluate if the pause should continue.
The state will be watching the pumps to make sure savings are delivered to Hoosiers when they go to fill up each week or whenever they do.
The governor has the power to suspend the gas sales tax under a declared emergency. The pause in sales tax takes effect immediately, but it may take a few days before drivers see a change at the pump.
How much relief will this provide to Hoosiers? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Robin Winston, Republican Whitley Yates, Oseye Boyd, editor-in-chief at Mirror Indy, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief at Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Samantha Horton, reporter and newscaster at WFYI. Whitley, the last time this happened was in 2000 under then Governor Frank O'Bannon. What does it say that Governor Braun took this action now?
I think it says that he is being a responsive leader, and this is how responsive government works. I think it's important to look at where we are. I went to the gas pump. It was $4.19, and I almost had a heart attack. And that was on the lower end from what I heard. And so the fact that he has made this decision that we haven't seen happen in 26 years is important. But also it's important that he's planning ahead. We have the reserves within the highway fund. And so we're not going to be trading, the economic instability for tomorrow for today's relief because we have the extra funds.
And Robin, I know Democrats in the past have been, they're critical of this a little bit. We look back to the invasion of Ukraine with Russia and when gas prices went up and there wasn't this relief that was provided. I guess, could you provide a perspective of what Democrats are seeing with this temporary pause?
They're coming around to what we suggested in 22. Frank O'Bannon did that. I happened to be part of his team then when we did it in 2000. Right to 16th in Illinois is where we made the announcement. This is good for Hoosiers. I think everybody's realizing more and more you got to talk about affordability. What it doesn't do, though, is address diesel fuel. So if you're a farmer in Sheridan or Tipton or Hopstadt or wherever, you don't get that break. And farming is a big part of our economy. Maybe in the future they'll look at extending that break to diesel fuel, which would benefit our agriculture.
And I know this is coming at a time with, primaries too coming around the corner and then the general. And so cost of living is a big topic point. I guess, can you talk about how this, how much is 17 cents maybe going to sway voters going into these elections?
Look, I don't think it's going to, make or break anyone. 17 cents, a gallon on a fill up. But, at least it's someone taking an action and recognizing the issues. I covered two other Republican governors when prices were very high. Governor Rich Daniels in 2007 got an opinion that said he didn't have the authority to do it from an attorney general. And then obviously in 22, Governor Holcomb said we didn't meet the 8% threshold to be, like a shortage of fuel. So, it is the first time a Republican governor has embraced this. And, I got to point out that we've got some members, some people up for re-election who are getting hit on old gas tax increase votes. So that is something they can then say, oh, I support this and I'm looking out for you.
And Oseye, I know this is a very volatile thing right now, too, we're seeing with gas prices. I guess, can we talk about, it's not just necessarily what people are paying at the pump. Could you talk about, this is also maybe affecting what they're paying at in the store for costs and how this could be a broader impact on cost of living?
Well, and I think that is part of the ideology, or part of the process, right? Is thinking about how much you spend at the pump affects you at the grocery store, affects you when you're paying your bills, affects childcare, affects everything you do, because it's a bill. It's something that we have to drive in this state. We are not a state where we have a lot of walkability, so driving is part of our everyday process. So I do think when people are complaining about the price at the pump, it's because the price at the pump affects everything else they have to do. And then when you think about diesel, I thought about that. Truckers, there's a lot of people who actually use diesel as well. So this does not actually affect them or help them. And I would like to see that happen at some point too. Well, they would probably like to see that happen at some point too. But I do think this is a smart move on the governor's part. And I don't know that it will make or break, but it will definitely help people. And I don't know that it will change people's votes, but it will make people think, okay, a little relief, just a little relief, so I can maybe breathe and maybe pay something else over here. 17 cents will add up over time, however long this lasts. The last time it happened, I remember everyone was driving the H2s and the Expeditions and the Escalades, and we're not there. We're not doing that now, so we may not have, $200 to fill up the pump, but still $50 to $60 is a lot when you were just paying $30.
Time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question, should the state extend the gas sales tax exemption beyond the 30 days? Vote yes or no. The last question posed to viewers, will gas and fuel prices continue to pressure Hoosiers? 97% said yes, 3% said no. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Indianapolis City County Councilor Ron Gibson said his home was the target of an overnight shooting incident, and a message against data centers was left behind. Eric Weddle has more.
Gibson said someone fired 13 rounds at the front door of his home and left a note on the doorstep that read, "No data centers." No one was injured. Indianapolis police say they believe the shooting was an isolated, targeted incident. The FBI is helping in the investigation. Gibson has been a focus in the debate of a proposed data center for Martindale-Brightwood. He represents the neighborhood on the council and has said it would benefit the area. But community members have protested against it, and some say a data center would hurt the neighborhood. The City-County Council will hold a final vote whether to approve the data center in the coming weeks.
Robin, we saw some state lawmakers swatted when voting on redistricting. Is political violence becoming more common now?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Look, Greg Good, a state senator from Terre Haute in Vigo County, had his home swatted in November. No one's been brought to trial. No one's been charged. Of 13 swatting incidents, 11 involving the General Assembly, City County Council member. In fact, this last session, they passed legislation banning doxing, which means delivering something so we know your address to intimidate you, because people are concerned about it. Ron Gibson does not deserve this to happen to him. Whoever does it, I hope that we track them down. I hope that they meet justice.
And Whitley, we're looking at this. Do you hear from, for Republicans, is it considering possibly not running in the future or being in office with the risks that come with now these targeted acts of violence or threats?
I don't know if it would 100% deter someone, but it definitely is something that you take into account, because it's not necessarily about the politician, but the safety of their family. And I think that that is a lot of people's concern. In this case and in this instance, I think that, Councilor Gibson has been on the opposite side of his community when it comes to data centers. And unfortunately, in today's society, you don't disagree with decorum. It seems to get really difficult, and people will take those actions out. I want whoever is responsible or aided in this to be brought to justice, no matter who it is.
And Niki, Robin brought up the swatting legislation, and I know it applies for legislators. Is there any chance in the future that this could extend to even local government leaders?
Well, the doxing legislation actually applies to anyone. It's not just legislators. Like, that was the example given during the discussions, but it could apply to Joe Schmo. If someone puts his address on Twitter and says someone should teach him a lesson, that would count. I do think a big concern here, and something that would maybe lower the temperature on these a little, is that we have had, as Robin said, no one identified for any of these. And I realize they're difficult, but, you know, we've got to get our authorities to start bringing some people, you know, holding them accountable and showing that you can't just get away with this, or it's just going to just grow and grow and grow.
And Shia, you know, I think the question too is like, how do we address it in the community? You know, how is it having more civics classes in this classroom? I guess, how do we lower this tension within communities that we're seeing with the threats and that are happening against political leaders?
That's a thought. That's a good idea. I do believe, Protect Martindale-Brightwood did come out with a statement saying they were that they were against this, that this should not happen, and whoever has done it needs to be brought to justice. I do think we have this thing called the internet, and people use it for all kinds of things. And a lot of times you can get people, you can radicalize people on the internet. And so people use it to actually stir up, get people riled up, and then you never know what's going to happen. We do need to bring the temperature down in so many ways in our culture at this point. There are so many things that people, you can't disagree anymore. You can't, you know, you can't just talk about an issue without someone taking it too far. We need to kind of go back to how we can learn to disagree, but still agree that we will talk about another day. We don't have to. He did go against his constituents, but that does not mean that this should be the result of that. That's way extreme, and we need to come back into the middle.
Thank you. And so we're going to move to topic 3 here, and Congressman André Carson is calling for Indiana officials to end the holding of immigration and customs enforcement detainees at Indiana's Miami Correctional Facility. Carson joined faith leaders and immigrant rights advocates outside the prison Thursday. The group sang songs and held signs while waiting for the congressman to finish his tour and meetings with ICE detainees. Carson says he spoke with those being held about the poor living conditions they are experiencing, with limited medical attention, a lack of clean clothes, and irregular meal times.
They are not violent criminals, and they don't deserve to be detained. Now, the Trump administration and his ICE Gestapo have thrown law and order out of the window in favor of fear and chaos.
At the time of Carson's visit, 2 ICE detainees have died at Miami Correctional since the prison began holding detainees last October. Cambodian national Lord Sim died last month, and Vietnamese immigrant Tuan Von Bui died last week. Carson has called for an investigation into both detainees' deaths. Niki, what are the chances the state will end its contract with ICE at Miami Correctional early?
Probably pretty slim. You know, they're obviously, the state of Indiana is making money on this, right? You know, they've gotten 2 payments so far, over $5 million. I do think, obviously, anytime anyone's in detention, there are going to be concerns or questions. And some of those are very normal for any detention. There are some issues, though, about staffing that I think are fair, especially with 2 of these incidences very close together where they were found, you know, unresponsive. So, and staffing has been an issue at Miami in general, not just for the detention space. So hopefully they're increasing some monitoring or some staffing. So while some of the complaints seem very basic in terms of when you're incarcerated, others I think are pretty concerning and fair game.
I know, Shia, you know, some of these concerns that were raised were with, you know, human rights, with, you know, access to medical care, clean clothes, religious beliefs being honored. I guess can we talk about, you know, when the state has there's been reporting of potentially expanding ICE facilities, and one in Indianapolis here. What are concerns that, you know, you see with communities here in Indiana, especially the immigrant communities?
Well, those concerns have always been a part of anytime you have prisons and detainees. That has always been a concern of making sure people have their rights, their rights to follow their religion practices. Food is always a complaint. Healthcare is always a complaint. Being listened to when you say you have a medical issue. So I think as we talk about ICE coming to Indianapolis, we're just going to see those things expand. We're going to hear more conversation about it and more concerns because it's a human rights issue at the end of the day. Even though they may be detainees for whatever reason, they're still people. And there's still rights that you have as a person, and we need to make sure people's rights aren't violated.
And Whitley, I know something that Niki brought up was about the staffing, and so there's a question that where's the state need being held accountable for some of these, providing what is agreed upon. I know there are requirements when you house ICE detainees. Where is the state falling of what needs to be done to make sure the state's fulfilling its agreement on that side of providing the adequate services?
I'd love to talk about accountability. Let's take that back to the Biden administration. We had over 20 million immigrants come into this country, and now it is the brunt of the states to then rescue us from this issue. And I think the problem that we have and the accountability started in the White House, and now it's at the state's door. I do think that no detainee, whether they are in prison, DOC, or an immigrant that has come to this country illegally, should be dying in custody. However, the DOC has already launched an investigation, and they are looking into why this happened to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so I think it's in bad faith for us to always assume that there was some type of nefarious act. The truth is that sometimes these things happen, but making sure that we investigate, have a plan, and we move forward is what's best for Hoosiers.
I know Congressman Carson, when visiting, was also requesting investigations into conditions and into the 2 deaths.
I do think the Department of Correction, though, is going to have to be a little more, right now they just refer all the questions to ICE, and I don't think that's acceptable, frankly, for a state-owned facility. I think DOC should be more clear on what they are doing to make sure these things are working out.
I think we have, as a nation, have to decide how we want to treat people. The Cato Institute, not exactly a big liberal think tank, points out that 73% of the people incarcerated don't have serious crimes. Only 5% do. I thought when the president talked about going after people, he was going to lock up the worst of the worst, the baddest of the baddest. But we have a little boy with a little blue toboggan hat on being pulled away. That's not what we agreed to. That's not what we thought. The bottom line is, as a leader, you respond to what you have in front of you. You don't blame the past. You respond there. Letting people die in a prison is not the right thing to do. Investigate it and get it resolved. You have to be very careful when you deal with for-profit entities involved in prison care. It's been proven all over the country. It's for-profit, so maybe it isn't always for service. So let's try to see if we can get this resolved.
And Robin, I want to ask you, with the 600, I know right now there's about 600 detainees being held. The contract goes for up to 1,000. So is the concerns of right now we're not even at the maximum capacity that the state has agreed to hold at Miami Correctional? What are your concerns with that?
I'm not so concerned about it proliferating because I think ICE has had its day. They have a new director. I think they learned from the past director. I think they've had some missteps. I think they've learned from them. Just the other night they talked about building an ICE or having an ICE office in Carmel, and a large number of people turned out in opposition to that. So I'm not so sure you're going to see them go to the 1,000 capacity right away.
Whitley, I'm going to give you a chance now.
I think that when thinking about this circumspectly, we have to also lay the accountability on those that came to this country. They didn't just come here and go through the proper process. There's a process that is legal for a reason. And when you circumvent that process and you bring your whole family, then the kids are honestly just, unfortunately, collateral damage in the decision making of the parents to come through that way. The process is there and it's important. And I think that for us, doing something about it allows us to maintain our sovereignty as a nation. And I think it's also helping us to maintain our safety. So all in all, I think we're doing the best that we can with what we have to work with. Can we be better? Always. A more perfect union is what we're striving for. But I don't think we've done anything maliciously in Indiana or Miami Correctional Facility that would warrant anyone to be having these types of press conferences out there.
And as these investigations come out, I feel like this will be something we'll be talking about again at this table. So for a final topic, a freeze in Indiana's child care voucher program is making it harder for foster parents to take in young children. And that's making it harder to find placement for infants. Eric Weddle reports.
Indiana foster parents qualify for vouchers to help pay for infant care. That's an essential need for those who work full-time. But in late 2024, a source of federal funding ended and the state stopped issuing new vouchers. Hancock County foster parent Jamie Potter recently declined a baby for placement. She'd already paid out of pocket to cover daycare for a previous child after not receiving a voucher.
My husband and I are about to renew our license. We have to renew every year. We're thinking about taking a break until things are figured out.
Shannon Schumacher is the CEO of the Villages of Indiana, the state's largest private foster agency.
We have 7 families who can no longer take small children that have always been just rock solid and will open their hearts and homes to babies.
Infant care runs about $1,200 a month. State officials say they are working to restore vouchers for 200 foster families, as required by state law. But in early March, just 124 foster children were using one. In total, more than 33,000 Indiana families remain on the child care voucher wait list.
Oseye, is the state letting these families down?
I guess if I were one of the families, I would say yes. Child care is expensive, especially for infants. But the families also do receive money for taking in these children. So it's a matter of what can we do, what can we afford? And for some of the families, they might not be able to take in any infants because they cannot afford to take care of their bills, their expenses, and child care. And we also have the child care issue happening in our state where we've had, 300 plus child care centers closed in Indiana. So that is coupling with this issue of, is there child care? Is it affordable? Is it near me? What can I do? But we also have, when we decided to practically ban abortions, we knew that there were going to be families, there were going to be parents, people who became parents who didn't really have the skills to become parents at that time. So then what do? And now we have more infants who actually need a foster home. So we have to, I think, as a state, really decide how we're going to address all of these issues together holistically, because they all affect everything. We don't want children in group homes forever. We don't want them raised in a group home. We don't want them raised in an institution or facility. We want them in a loving home. We want them actually back with their parents whenever possible. But that's not always the case. So what do we do as a state? This is an issue that we just can't piecemeal together. We need to have a roundtable, figure some things out.
And Niki, I think it's a bigger conversation of, is our welfare system in the state in jeopardy? And we're looking, I know childcare brought up as well. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that are being brought up right now in Indiana.
Yeah, I think the trend is obviously to move people off of these public assistance programs. But especially in the child care one, I will say, that impacts the economy as a whole. So you have to be careful on the fine line on that one, because if the parents can't work and fill the jobs that the industries here need, then that just puts us behind the 8 ball.
Mm-hmm. I know, Robin, the General Assembly did open up some money that could be available, but it's something that other departments are going to be fighting over. I guess, what is that challenge right now of there's, at least until next budget, there's going to be limited funds to address some of these?
I think we ought to not do it piecemeal. I think we have to have a comprehensive plan. Child care is exorbitant in cost, but I ask people to remember that child care leads to jobs. Jobs builds our economy. So very few people are at home with child care watching Price is Right or Jeopardy or whatever. They are working in many cases, taking care of their kids in their home, or they're out in our economy. We should make sure that we put together a task force that goes literally from pre-K all the way through to high school to figure out what we're going to do about the child care issue.
Mm-hmm. I know this was something that was brought up when Governor Mike Braun stated the state, but it was pushed to, we'll address it next session, which is this upcoming one with the budget in 2027. I guess what are some of the things that lawmakers are really going to have to do when, I know last year or last budget session they had to make cuts, so how are they going to have to weigh this into that conversation?
This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, as I was a ward of the state growing up, and I understand what it feels like to rely on the state to provide for you, and when that doesn't happen, how the quality of care impacts your life drastically. And so knowing that the vouchers have impacted infants in foster care is terrible to know. But to see the investment of the over $140 million that was accessed in a non-budget year to be able to attempt to mitigate some of this is important. There needs to be support for the child care centers and the operators. There needs to be support for the parents in having options that are close and accessible to them. And then we also need to think about the idea that Indiana, being a pro-life state, in policy must also be pro-livelihood and think about the livelihood of the children. And I'm hopeful to see in the next budget cycle how that pro-livelihood will take place through policy.
And so it's going to be, I think, interesting next session with the budget. So that's Indiana Week in Review for this panel. Our panel has been Democrat Robin Winston, Republican Whitley Yates, Oseye Boyd, Editor-in-Chief at Mirror Indy, and Niki Kelly, Editor-in-Chief at Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Samantha Horton, reporter and newscaster at WFYI. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Bar Ritchie.